using Galileo databases and locating traditional scholarly sources in previous assignments. But what's the first thing you'll do when you begin your protest songs assignments? A Google search. Now, websites aren't automatically unreliable like some people would have you believe, but finding the best web sources possible requires some critical thinking on your part. Let's suppose that you're looking into the backgrounds of Bob Dylan's Subterranean Homesick Blues, the song that we have been analyzing in class. If we search Google using the terms Bob Dylan civil rights songs, we'll come up with a massive amount of results, 1,440,000. That's a lot. And not all of these sites were created equally. I clicked on the fourth link, a page in Bob Dylan's official site. We want to know more about what Dylan is protesting with Subterranean Homesick Blues. A page called Bob Dylan, a musical voice of the civil rights movement, looks like a good place to start. After all, it's an official licensed site. However, a closer inspection will reveal that this particular page is actually a blog entry by a user. Now the decision is harder. Is this source good enough to use in your project or any academic assignment? Librarians developed the CRAAP test to help you answer that question. CRAAP, with an extra A, is an acronym for currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose. And it's easy to remember because it helps you sort the good sites from, well, the crap. We'll be using the website that we found just a moment ago and applying the CRAAP test to that and seeing how it adds up and answering the big question of whether or not it is a site worthy of being in a project like the one you'll be starting about your protest songs. You'll want to have the CRAAP test criteria in mind as you look for resources to build those websites. Currency deals with the timeliness of the information. So when you're considering the currency of a web source, obviously your first big question is, when was this published or posted? Sometimes you have a year, sometimes you have actually a date and a month. And sometimes that information isn't included, and that could be a problem. Another question to consider, has the information been revised or updated? If it's a site that was created in 2000 and they don't appear to have, in the last 11 years, revisited that site, that could be an issue, right? Maybe there have been changes in that information since then, advances of some sort. Which brings you to the next question to consider. Does your topic actually really require current information, or will older sources work as well? When you're dealing with literature, some reviews from, say, the 50s and 60s, those theories are still valid. But when you're dealing with like technology and medical sort of sources, those change every day, and you may want the absolute most current, most up-to-date in those. With web sources, you also want to look and see if all of the links are still functional. If you're clicking on links and you're getting error messages and pages that no longer exist, that's a sign, again, that the site has been abandoned and probably isn't the most up-to-date or maybe even the most trustworthy. A quick glance at our blog here will show us that this was actually posted in July of 2008, so that's been about 3 years ago. This one we found underneath the title of the piece. Sometimes you have to scroll down to the very bottom of a web page and look at the copyright information that's there. You need to ask yourself, in this case, does it really matter that this is 3 years old? Or does that still work, since we're looking at Dylan songs from the 60s and issues from the 60s? Relevance has to do with the importance of the information for your needs. Regarding relevance, you want to ask yourself, how much does this info actually relate to your topic? Sometimes titles can be misleading. You want to carefully examine the full site. You also want to consider the intended audience for the website. In other words, who is it written for? Audience affects language and style in very important ways. On a related note, the next question, is the info written at an appropriate level for you? You're in high school now, so a site on the civil rights movement designed for 4th graders, is it going to be really of any use to you? It's going to be far too elementary, too easy, too basic. You're capable of understanding much more than what's going to be presented in a site like that. On the other hand, an article that's for, say, a journal of neuroscience is probably going to go over your head and mine, because it's written for an audience with advanced degrees, people who've been trained for years in the language of neuroscience. They know all the jargon, all the fancy words that we don't. You also want to look at a variety of sources before deciding on the one that you're going to use. So don't take the lazy man's way out and just first entry, first hit and go with that. Do look at a variety of things and choose the very best, the one that is most relevant to your topic. We want to refer back to our site, the Bob Dylan site, the blog that we were looking at, and to think about how relevant is it to our topic. Now remember, we're actually looking to analyze his song Subterranean Homesick Blues. So if you take time to look through this website, you'll see that while it discusses pretty in depth several of his songs like The Times They Are Changing, The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll, Hurricane, and a few others, it doesn't actually specifically address Subterranean Homesick Blues. So in a general sense, yes, it discusses Dylan and the civil rights movement and some of the ways that he was involved, but it doesn't actually look at the song that we are dealing with. So it's up to you. Do you think you could find a better site, or actually are you going to be able to draw some good information from this site in particular? The first A in CRAAP stands for authority. This has to do with the source of the information. These days, anyone who wants to can create a website very easily and for free, which is a good thing. And actually, you're going to be doing it as part of this assignment. But it also means that when you're considering the validity and the reliability of web sources, that you have to consider the authority of the source. What that amounts to is that you really want to ask yourself, who's the author of this source and why should you trust their word on the subject? So you want to consider some related questions like, what are the credentials that this person has? Do they have PhDs or other advanced degrees in the subject? Have they published articles or other books in this area? Do they have years of work experience in the field? You also want to be sure to look at the bio page or about me sections. Most websites have that, and you can learn more about the author and their affiliations, but not all websites have that, and that's definitely kind of a red flag if you don't know who the author is. You also want to think about the URLs. .coms are typically companies. There will be lots of ads in that, and their purpose is often to sell you things. .edu for educational sites like universities and schools. .gov, our government sites. .org for organizations. We want to try to find out as much as we can about the author of the site that we've been looking at, this blog. Now, since this is a blog, we're actually not dealing with an author's real name. We have a username or handle, and this is Geoff. Let's call him Jeff instead. And so you want to learn all you can about him. So what's his background? Why should we take his word on these ideas about Bob Dylan, his connection to the civil rights movement? Now, you can often, this is a link to his name, you can click on that and hopefully learn more about Geoff. In this particular case, clicking on his name didn't really bring up a lot of information. We actually only get to see what he has previously published. So there's the piece we've been looking at, and then there's also another piece from actually a day before this one, another blog also about Dylan. So you can look at that and see what it dealt with, but we're really not getting a lot of information here. So we didn't actually learn a lot about Jeff by clicking on his name. We could just read another piece that he wrote. But actually in the first couple of paragraphs, the introductory paragraphs to the piece that we've been focusing on about Dylan and the civil rights movement, we can actually learn that he is a student, probably a graduate student, who's been working with his advisor on music-related research, specifically on Dylan and the civil rights movement and those influences. So you want to think, how much of an authority can a student be? Is it possible to become an authority and well-versed and someone trustworthy without the degrees, without the publishing history? The next A stands for accuracy, the reliability, truthfulness, and correctness of the content. The big question when considering accuracy is, where does the information come from? A reliable source will always document their sources, usually by including a bibliography of some sort that has publication info for their sources so readers can locate and read those for themselves. You also want to think about how well supported by evidence is the information. Is the author simply making broad claims without any support, or does he provide examples, statistics, direct quotes, or other forms of evidence? You should be able to look at other sources and verify info such as statistics and dates. Errors in this information, or more basic errors like spelling and grammar mistakes, are a sure sign that the source is less than reliable. One of the things you'll notice as you read through the blog that we're using as a sample here is that this author has referenced and actually directly quoted from several of Bob Dylan's songs. Now, while there are direct quotes here, they don't appear to be in any recognizable style, so not MLA or APA. One thing you always want to check for is, where exactly did this source, your web source, get their information? Now, in this Bob Dylan site, you can see that he has included a works cited of sorts here for documentation and list 4 books. So that's where his info comes from. Now, he hasn't actually cited within the text which particular bits he used, so that can be a point against this, but there are sources listed, legitimate published sources. The final criteria to consider in the CRAAP test is the web source's purpose, or the reason the information exists. When considering the purpose of a web source, you're really considering why it was written. Is it meant to inform or to teach? Is it trying to sell you something or to persuade you in some way? Authors should be upfront about their intentions. However, it is often up to you to decide whether there's bias present in a source or whether it's objectively written. So why did Jeff write this blog about Bob Dylan? What was his intent? Did he mean to inform and to teach? Or is he trying to persuade you or sell you Bob Dylan in a way? Now this is, if you read the first few paragraphs on the site, it is an essay. And so it's the author's educated opinion. These are his ideas based on info that he's gathered about the historical context of the 1960s and his own interpretations of Dylan's lyrics. Essays are arguments, so they are meant to be persuasive as well as informative. Together we've looked at the currency, relevance, authority, accuracy, and purpose of one website. But the most important question of all remains, would you use this website in your projects? Review the website and use the graphic organizer provided to discuss each criteria with your partner. So, is this website credible, or is it just crap?